hiring another leader is going to be uncomfortable, but in my mind, it's the unlock. Because what company have you ever seen that essentially didn't overcome having the founder-led company that is always just led by that founder? It's like you have to get past that step. You can win here in Thailand. You cannot go in saying, I'm going to supplant myself and land in Thailand and then all of a sudden win the same way that I would win back home. Marketing, I think of it as a revenue generation engine. Now, if it is seeming like a cost center, I'd argue that something's going wrong.
Scott Pressimone, thanks for coming on today. You're a Bangkok-based strategic advisor and fractional executive who used to work at Accenture. Is that correct?
Yeah, I worked at Accenture in the US. That's where I started my career. I've been in Thailand for the majority of my adult life now. I learned a lot from my time at Accenture, and I've carried that on to what I do here in Thailand.
When you say the majority of your adult life, you look like you're in your low 20s, right? So it's only been a few years. No, you've been here for quite a while.
I originally came to Thailand in 2012. I took a gap year after my career at Accenture. I decided to take a sabbatical for a while. I never went back. Nothing bad about the US. I absolutely love being American. But when I was traveling, I kind of wanted the adventure. When I eventually found Thailand, I thought, you know what, I'm going to actually build a career here. And so in 2012 is when I first came to Thailand, but it was probably about 2013 that I actually started working and developing that career here.
Right. And you now have a family here and kids in school. And
Yeah, and that was quite a transition too. I think it's a great place to raise a family. I have a couple young children, 6 and 8 years old, and they love it here. I mean, we live in a great community. We have a great school here. So I think you can really raise a family here. You don't need to necessarily go back to a home country. I know you're raising children here, Jake, and I think it's just a great place because my neighbors, everyone just loves kids here. You don't really get the kind of dirty look when your kid cries when they're still quite young. I think Thais are very accepting. They're very helpful. You go into a restaurant. I remember when my children were much younger, if they were crying, the waiter or waitress would come along and say, oh, I can walk your kid and go check out the chickens in the back or whatever. And it's just crazy how friendly people are here to children.
you've been here longer than most foreigners. You know, the average foreigner here hasn't been here that long. So that's amazing. And you came out pretty early in your career. And you currently help business leaders fix strategy, growth, ops gaps without, without huge budgetary investments and big team growths. How would you describe that better than I just did?
Sure. I think you described it well. Going back to my time at Accenture, one thing I really liked about Accenture compared to some of the other consulting firms, you have Deloitte, Accenture, Bearing Point, all these other ones that I was around, McKinsey, you have the strategy firms. One thing I did like about Accenture was the fact that they did a decent amount of implementation. It wasn't just providing a strategy doc. It was actually coming in and saying, we'll even help you execute it. And of course, there were divisions that were just the outsourcing division. So you had the strategist come in, and then eventually you'd have the business process outsourcing come in and continue to develop a project. I liked that about Accenture. When I started doing more consulting work here, I had that in mind, where it was less of this low touch, deliver a strategic plan and say good luck. And it was way more of actually be deeply involved within a company. Now, having said that, what I do tend to work with small and mid-sized businesses here in Thailand or international companies that have relatively small operations here. They don't necessarily have very large budgets, and really they just need something that works. And that's where a lot of what I do is say, okay, well, do we actually have a strategy in place? And that could be a marketing strategy. Maybe they're not even profitable yet, or they're struggling in other areas. But the point is we have to have a strategy first. So I help them develop a strategy. Of course, marketing tends to be the hot topic. A lot of companies are still trying to develop and grow. I work a lot with the marketing side of things, making sure to get profitability up, but also to get brand exposure and awareness up. And so I do that. And then, of course, when marketing is working smoothly, guess what? You start to have operational challenges. Can your team handle the capacity and other things? I'm almost creating a new problem and then trying to solve that new problem created with the marketing. To be honest, it's less of a focused target offering. It's pretty boutique. It's not like here's just a package. It's a lot more of what is the actual problem that business is experiencing? How can I get my hands dirty and work from within the business and then start to fix those problems, the biggest problems they're experiencing, and then changing and adapting my solution over time with the new problems or challenges that arise for a company.
Yeah, that'll be interesting because what we'll dive into in a little bit is why don't you then just get hired at a company and do that? But let's not go there yet. You also host the Made It in Thailand podcast, and you lead Fraction, which is a community that connects SMEs with fractional leaders. So very, very helpful to connect the dots to businesses who need some more senior capacity to come in, but maybe don't have a full-time budget or don't necessarily need it long-term. You want to mention anything about the podcast and this Fraction community,
Sure.
which I just joined, by the way?
Yes, yes, yes. So speaking of fractioned, I mentioned where I specialize in. I have a finance degree, so I don't claim to be up to snuff when it comes to the finance side of things, but I've often found that companies that don't have a CFO might struggle with their finance front. My specialization is primarily operational improvement, marketing, and of course, a little bit of finance, a little bit of other things. But my point is that I'm not everything to everyone. And I think it's really important to have different specialists with different backgrounds and different executives with different backgrounds. So when it comes to what fractioned is, I've met a lot of individuals like yourself, Jake, and people that have really good specialization and have they're either running their own business or they're an executive in a company, and they can help a lot of these companies that I work with. And so it's a little bit of a referral network, because if I'm helping on the marketing front and acting as a fractional CMO or something for a company, oftentimes they say, you know what, Scott, I wish I had someone who was the equivalent of you to help me with sales. Do you know anyone that is a fractional salesperson? Or do you know anyone that is a fractional product person? And that's where I decided, you know what, I need to develop out this community and be able to refer them to the right people. As I met all these great people here in Thailand and in Southeast Asia, some Thais, some expats, I just wanted to pull everyone together so we could learn from each other and refer business to each other, since we're kind of vetting each other and saying, you know what, I really trust Jake because I've spoken with you many times and worked with you. And it's to say, you know, I want to send people your way if they have challenges on the marketing or video front, for instance.
Right. What I've appreciated about the community so far is it does feel highly practical, hands-on. Like everybody is a business owner, a very diverse group. And then it's not a huge group either. It's a lot more curated than that. It's invite only. And then it does feel like you can really let your hair down with that group, which is very refreshing. You don't have to put on these pretenses. You can relate to other business owners who are struggling with sometimes the stupidest things, right? But that are actual real day-to-day struggles that someone else might go, you know what? I spent the last 3 years figuring that out the hard way. Here's some advice for you.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I did join a few groups specifically around fractional. And I don't just offer fractional CMO or COO services, to be clear, but there are these fractional groups out there, and there are some great ones. One thing that I found was a lot of the ones that are very large groups that are hundreds or 10, let's say a 10,000. I think there are some that are that large. They have great documentation, great sharing. But what I found is on the community front, people join those communities and then they leave. Or they
Yeah,
join them to say, hey, this is the type of lead I'm looking for. And then
right.
they leave shortly
To get
thereafter.
business.
Exactly. And so they're just trying to get that business, and that's totally fine. I think that is the struggle of most small business owners, consultants, or coaches. How do you get new business? When it's not a close-knit community, you don't have any camaraderie with those individuals. Whereas a smaller group that's a little more focused, at least in a region, we can let our hair down, be more honest, and share the struggles. Now, sometimes there's some overlap between our offerings. Jake, what you focus on, there's someone else that also focuses on video. I focus a little bit on video. As long as it's good people that want to help each other, we're not going to steal information from each other. You already are contributing a lot. Others are contributing a lot. We're not going to go through and say, this is my list of leads today.
Here's their phone number.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the phone number.
Right.
If we did, I'd argue that the type of people and the personality types that we have and the trust that we have, I just don't think anyone in the group is going to do anything bad to anyone else, even if they're indirect competitors in some way.
I agree, because I had a chat with a client who has done work with us in the video sphere yesterday from Australia, and gave him a quote on continued work. And we're negotiating a bit. I just said, I know what you need. If this is still a little out of budget, let me know. I have people I can recommend to you that can do it exactly on your budget. Now, if you do want to work with me, here's kind of my conditions, and this is what me and my team need and require. I'm very happy to refer you to the next guy down. It means you got what you need, my friend gets business, and I look like the good guy because I'm the referral person who got you what you need. Everybody comes out great.
Absolutely. I think it's really important that we don't discount our services. If you have a certain level of expertise, Jake, and then you have a team, you have to pay their salaries. Realistically, if someone doesn't have that budget, you can either say, sorry, that's it. I'm not for you. You can try to discount your prices, in which case that's probably going to lead into not the best relationship with that client. Or you can do what you just said and refer them to someone that's going to fit their budget. And I think that's a great way to do it. Everyone does win, as you said. One way I like to summarize my services and the services of some of the other people that do similar things that I do in other functions is we think of like 3 tiers. The highest level tier is really this fractional tier. And to be honest, it's not the cheapest offering because a fractional CMO, for instance, we're not 1/100th of the cost of an actual CMO. We're maybe 1/2-ish, somewhere around that range. And so it's not the most budget offering out there. What it is it's a way for companies to get the executive level leadership that they might not have at a more affordable rate, just with less risk, right? So I think that's kind of the highest tier offering that I offer. And I can only do that for 2 to 3 companies at a time. Then I work with a coaching level tier where I'm a coach or a consultant, and that's relatively hands-on. That's where I'm actually, in some cases, having daily one-on-ones with the team or managing the weekly meetings, but I'm really still feeling a little bit like an employee in that case, in that I am highly involved in the company. If there's a team outing, I'm going to that team outing if I'm on that tier, or they're going to invite me. The point is I'm a kind of a team member in that case. That's lower and less expensive and less time, on my part, that makes it more affordable. Or the third offering and the lowest level is this advisory tier. And that's for companies that need a little bit of strategic advice. They have leadership meetings with maybe their founders, and they just need that third party perspective where it's someone they can bounce ideas off of. So I offer those 3 tiers of offerings for the reason that not everything is for everyone and you have to find the right thing. But as you said, there's someone that wants that highest tier engagement, but they can't afford my rate. I've been doing this for many years. I've been executive in multiple companies. And so I have to be careful with my time. I have to be careful with who I work with. And so I can't really discount my prices. So in some cases, there's someone that offers that at a slightly lower rate than me, and they might be a better fit, which you described, Jake. And that's what I can do as well, as refer them to someone else. I've certainly done that many times. And I think everyone wins.
I think when you're negotiating with a client too, and you show that you're perfectly willing to send them to someone else that might be a bit more budget friendly, it creates a lot more trust as well from the client side. Is like, this guy doesn't necessarily need my work. They're not bending over backwards to try to get this project, and they want me to get what I need, and they're willing to forgo whatever I was going to pay them to someone else so that I can get what I need. It sends a lot of good signals. And then it is a good way to sometimes get out of a project. Not every project is something that you should take on. So I want to get into the core of our discussion here. And I'm going to ask, we're going to kind of go, I don't know if you hear all the banging and stuff like that.
I do a bit, but it's totally fine.
Okay, so this is a new co-working space here in Chiang Mai, and they are still getting things installed. I'm guessing most of this will be cut out when I run all this through Adobe Enhance. If any artifacts are left, it is definitely.
Well, it's all about us being real and transparent, and this is just what happens sometimes, right?
Yeah. My first online live webinar I did, my house and my home office is so quiet, right? And my first online webinar I do, the neighbor starts to tear out a bunch of their rooms with sledgehammers in the first 30 seconds of me going live. I have the headphones in. I'm like, wait a second. Each of these themes that I want to chat with you briefly on and get your insights on, I want you also to set some context each time, because I might bring it up in a simple way, but go ahead and set up some context and give your thoughts on it. One of the key things that you're helping out with is for managers doing more with less, right? That is not something new. Companies have always tried to do more with less. We do live in an age where AI is a thing, outsourcing is a thing, Fiverr is a thing. There's rising costs here or there, tariffs, all these kinds of things. People are always trying to do more with less. In your case, from what you've seen, what areas are some of the biggest blocks to effectively doing more with less? We listed out a couple things. That could be skills, budget, leadership, buy-in. Is it a combination of all those? What are your thoughts on that?
Doing more with less. If you're a smaller business or just starting out and expanding in Thailand, for instance, of course, you don't have unlimited budget. you definitely have to work within reasonable confines. When it comes to the challenges I see, often think, I mean, if I'm honest, I think that people have a budget they sometimes pick out of thin air and they just assume. And to me, let's just say we're talking about marketing. I think of it as a revenue generation engine, not a cost center in your company. Now, if it is seeming like a cost center, I'd argue that something's going wrong. But to me, it's about always having a multiplier of how much we're spending. So if we're spending X amount, then we should be delivering 2 times or 3 times on that. The budget isn't the problem because it should be paying for itself very easily. Now, it doesn't pay for itself instantly, but it should be paying for itself. One of the biggest problems is, essentially, where did the budget come from and why? And if you don't know that, and let me just give a simple story. When I was briefly working for a marketing agency here in Thailand, they worked with a lot of different companies, and I'd sometimes talk on the phone to people in these client companies, right? They would say something like, this is the budget we're dealing with, this is how much we have to spend on this. Let's say they're asking about Google ads and other things, and they have this budget in mind. So I was reacting to that at the time. Fast forward a bit, I branched off and created my own operation. I started offering these fractional CMO leadership services and executive leadership services. In one case, I worked with the same company that I had talked with years prior. And I was talking with the owners about budgets. And I realized the owner might have set an idea or a budget, passed it along to the sole internal marketing person. That sole marketing person is maybe who I was talking to as a vendor. And what I found when I then worked within, I was talking to the owner and I asked, what's your budget? How do you manage your budget? And the honest answer that they told me was, we don't have a budget. We've never managed a budget. We don't know our budget.
Just an arbitrary number we picked out of thin air that we were comfortable with.
Exactly. And so I asked things like, okay, cool. How much have you spent in the past? They didn't have this sort of document to show where the money's been going. And so when I started working on a higher level engagement with them, the first thing I did was I looked retroactively at the last year to develop what has been your budget, despite not having a budget. What have you actually spent? And then we could base something off of that. I also like to think in terms of the lifetime value of a client. In this particular company I'm referring to, they sell a very high cost service where the lifetime value of a client could be $500,000. If that is the value of a client, you have to work backwards from there and you have to start doing some calculations and saying, okay, well, how many of those clients, how many of those prospects do you close? Let's say it's a 50% close ratio. And then how many leads do you get? And you're working backwards to figure out, okay, what's the average cost per lead to acquire that $1 million or $500,000 lifetime value client? And so that should relate to how much your budget is. I get that some people might be thinking that I'm now saying, this is why you need to give me a huge budget. That's not the case. Like in a lot of cases, I do manage the budget, but in my mind, my whole relationship is based on, can I get the ROI for the client? And so I want it to be based on something logical. The reality is that usually the competitors these companies are going against are smart competitors that know the lifetime value of their client. They know how much a lead should cost, and then they're spending, let's say, 10 times more than this arbitrary number that this particular company might have picked out of the air. So that is one of the first things. I know your question was around working with a small budget or limited resources, and I certainly have found creative ways to do that because you got to know your numbers. Because if you don't know your numbers, you're not even going to pick a good starting point. You're just going to pick something random out of the air, and then you're setting your team up for failure. Because then you're not hiring the right team, or you're not spending the right on your ads, or you're not investing in things like video. You don't know which money you should be working with to actually get what you're looking to achieve.
I will be really curious because my business is fairly new. I've had a registered business in Chiang Mai for just over 3 years now. This calendar year, 2025, was the first time we actually had legitimate marketing investment. So I'm going to be retroactively looking at that and seeing the effects and then helping to create that 2026 marketing budget.
Yeah, and it doesn't, just to be clear, Jake, it doesn't have to be fancy. I'll admit
Yeah.
I don't like everything to live in Excel, but I do actually like Excel. And yes, AI tools are getting better at helping us plan these things out. But I think a budget is just very simple. It's how much did you spend each month? Categorize it into very easy groups. It could be 5 different groups that you're working with of like, okay, this is our ad spend, and this is our thought leadership, and this is our whatever. Like, just this are the events that we're managing, the workshops, and just having a few categories by month right? And then you can start to see and say, let's judge how well these things did. Workshops or in-person events might not pay off instantly, but if you work backwards from the clients you land, you might find out, oh, that's a client that might have seen our ad 3 times, but the thing that pushed them over the edge was the workshop. Try to track back to where these individuals are coming from, and you might find that even if that event budget was relatively high, it actually paid off way more than the ad budget. That actually brings up lead attribution. I do think it gets increasingly difficult to give a very clear lead attribution to know exactly where a lead came from. Oftentimes it's multiple things. And in the example I just gave, it might have been they went to a workshop, then they saw an ad 3 times, then they attended a webinar, then they did this, right? And so you kind of have to use a blended acquisition because it's a little bit of a lot of different things.
It is.
I think it's important that you're not spending money that's getting no results, but it's a 1+1=3 scenario where if you're doing 5 things, they play off each other. If you say that 5th thing, oh, I'm spending a lot on attending or hosting events, we better cut that. What you don't realize is you might be chopping off something that helps people make a purchase. You got to be smart about where that money is going and not just try to say, we got all our leads from ads, cut everything else out or stop attending events. That might have a far worse effect than you anticipate.
100%. I've worked in environments where people have no attribution whatsoever. It's all just kind of gut feeling, or we've always done this. We came back from a trade show and it seemed to go well, had some good conversations. And then I've worked in the opposite environments where no matter how many times you explain that we have a long sales cycle and there's a lot of very personalized, like they aren't just like seeing an ad and then buying. And yet management is continuously always wanting to see ROI on every little thing. And you're like, we've had this discussion 12 times now. So minimum viable team, especially and does that mean marketing team? What is a minimum viable team for a business, not a startup, but a business that has customers, has some things going on, probably looking to grow. Maybe they haven't really invested a whole lot in marketing, or they've had a couple people here or there. How do they start? What does that look like?
Yeah.
You go first, and then I'll give my thoughts because I'm going to have to collect my thoughts.
Well, as you said, I think this can apply to different teams in an organization, right? So let's say it's the customer service team or the client management team or whatever else. In any startup company, for instance, you might have a person of one. It might be essentially the founder is the one person, and then you're starting to develop a team. How do you grow that team? Let's use the example of marketing. It's pretty straightforward, I think, with marketing compared to some of the other functions. Usually what happens is this. Again, it's starting with the founder. They're the one that's, let's say, doing the marketing, hiring some agency, and then they're just going with that. Okay, I got something up. I got a website. I've got someone running ads for me, right? That's pretty standard. After a while, as you mature a little bit more, you start to realize we need something a little bit more. One of the first things that companies do is they hire that all-in-one marketer. And it's usually someone who is not super experienced, to be honest, because they need to be affordable.
They have to be cheap.
Yeah, so they're affordable, and they're, maybe there's someone that overpromises a bit, because if they're, let's say, a fresh grad or something like that, they don't know what they don't know, and they might accept a salary that maybe isn't even the right fit, or they express their experience a little bit higher than it actually is, because it's a little bit similar to what we talked about with budget. If you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know the warning signs, etc. And so I'm not saying anything negative about these individuals, but I think what often happens is if it's the founder that's hiring them and they say, do you do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, right? And then that person says, oh, yes, I can do that. And then they say,
perfect,
got it. Okay, I can give you, let's say in Thailand, 30,000 baht. Okay, yeah, I'll take it. Okay, great. So now they got their 30,000 baht employee that says they can do everything. Now, of course, that doesn't last for long. What I've often seen in that is sometimes you're just going to get that individual being super overwhelmed. Other times you're going to have a high churn rate. So you're going to end up having to replace that person every 6 months, because remember, they come in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then they kind of go out with their tail between their legs. In any case, let's just say that there's usually a one-person marketing team, and it's usually kind of the person that's junior and doesn't know any better. Now, this is where I usually come in, because one of the first things you need to do is to have someone leading the marketing that isn't that junior marketer. It's usually the owner or the founder if it's that small organization, or it's some operations lead who is responsible for marketing for some reason or something like that, right? And so When that happens, what I usually do is I would say you need a leader. You need a marketing leader. You could hire a marketing director or a marketing manager who's very experienced, but they're just under that title and they're going to manage this individual. And that's totally fine. What I do though is sometimes that can be hard to get that internal hire because they're a higher risk than that first hire I mentioned.
More expensive.
Yeah. And so then you're thinking about
They can be hard to find.
absolutely. And that brings up the point. I wouldn't say to go away from individuals that are looking for work because they can be highly talented people, but sometimes the people trying to fill that role are also a little bit desperate. So I'd argue that sometimes to get the better people, you actually do want to get them from somewhere else, networking and actually finding the person you want to work with and kind of building the dream job for them so you can pull them in, as opposed to just looking on the market for the individuals that are out of work.
Good point.
And all the people that are out of work are not by any means not good. It's just a matter of sometimes you have to strike the balance and actually see what's out there in the market and see what the high performers, where they're working and how you could potentially attract them. But in any case, that's why that fractional model makes a lot of sense for some companies. In the fractional case, you have people that are not desperate, right? They're people that work with maybe a client or two and are saying, I can come in on a fractional basis and lead your marketing team. Since I've had experience, I can come in and start managing that internal marketing person. I can set a budget and do all these other things that I do for these other organizations. And I can do that. And that person can report to me on a fractional basis. They're reporting to me as their manager, but I'm a part-time manager or leader within the company. And what I often have to do is control the owner a bit because the owner is used to controlling what's going on. And we have to slow down and say, hold on, let's actually set our budget. Let's figure out our priorities. Let's figure out our 90-day plan. Let's figure out our quarterly goals. For companies I work with that use the EOS framework, the entrepreneurial operating system, they might have their quarterly rocks. And usually that marketing department hasn't had quarterly rocks because they just don't have time. They're just juggling. And so I think it's way more.
So you're managing, you're slowing down. You're helping them basically put this together in a framework. Previously, it might have been we just do some social and, oh, there's this event coming up and the website needs to be updated because we have some new products or we changed the color or the functions or features. So you're helping them put that together in a bit of more of a strategic long-term look, and then also managing and educating up and down at the same time.
Yes.
You know that you're going to do that as opposed to maybe a newer hire who doesn't realize that they're going to have to actually manage up quite a bit and help that owner transition out of having to have all that control over the marketing.
Yes, that's exactly right, Jake. I think that managing up and down, I really love to train individuals, even if they're relatively new or junior. A lot of times they are feeling overwhelmed and they love to work with someone who's going to defend them a bit or explain things to them, right? And so I love working with them. But to your point, you have to be able to manage up as well. And this is why when I accept these roles or positions, the owner I work with has to understand this, because I'm not coming in as a subordinate. And this is honestly one of the biggest challenges. Let's say that when you build your company up from the ground up, you're used to having to, move all the pieces around. You have to kind of control and make sure things are working properly, right? And if you're doing that, let's say for 5 years or 10 years, you're very used to being that person that everyone is relying on and everyone is listening to. And what you might forget, especially here in Thailand, is that means what, is right. It's the person that's at the top. That's Kun Jake, I got to listen to Kun Jake. And so everyone is following your orders, whether or not it's the right thing to do or not. And so my case is not that I know better than an owner, but it's that I provide another perspective. And I'm going to be looking at what do the team members say? What are the competitors doing? What's going on? And then what are you doing over here? Oftentimes I have to come in at the same level, or even if I'm not an advisor tier, I have to seem as a peer to that founder or owner. And yes, they can fire me. So in a way, I'm a little bit of a subordinate role. But remember, I don't need the work, the companies that I know I can have an impact on, because I don't mind losing a job if we're butting heads too much. Realistically, my goal is impact. My goal is, have I helped that company achieve that? That means sometimes I have to rub a little bit with that owner or founder because they're used to always getting their way. Sometimes that is not the right solution. So I know this is not the best way to pitch my services because realistically, it's an uncomfortable thing. But I'd argue that that's the big unlock sometimes. The big unlock for a founder could be, you kind of build up this really thick skin and you build up these broad shoulders because of all the things that you have to hold on your shoulders. I'm here to say, you can put some of that weight on me because I'm another leader as well. I've started my own business as well. I've worked in the C-suite as well. I've done all these things. So give me some of the weight, but you got to give me the authority along with it. Otherwise, I can't actually help that team because you're just going to be telling me what to do. Then what's the point? People have to come in knowing that, hiring another leader is going to be uncomfortable, but in my mind, it's the unlock. Because what company have you ever seen that essentially didn't overcome the thing of having the founder-led company that is always just led by that founder? It's like you have to get past that step.
And I think the right founders that you would want to work with, they realize that, but they may not see the light at the end of the tunnel. And a lot of times you are one of the lights at the end of the tunnel that help them start to transition to a different era in their business leadership. I remember for myself, I'm in the process of kind of doing what you said. I've trained a team. They're doing very good work, and they can take a lot more leadership now. And for the last couple of years, I've been, giving out responsibility and leadership, and sometimes then taking it back and supporting those people and giving them safe places. But now it is a bit disconcerting. It's strange to see a lot of the things that I relied on before, I'm not necessarily needed for now. But that's actually a good thing. And I think a founder should be looking forward to that discomfort.
Yes.
Because they don't want to do this the rest of their life, right? You want to build something that can survive without you, and you could be on the beach and people are enjoying their careers and taking responsibility.
Yes, that is so important, Jake. And I think that the owners might forget that they're trying to do. Are they trying to eventually sell the business? Are they trying to eventually not sell the business? They want this to be their lifelong business, but they want to be able to take a step back and be more in an advisory role over time, where they're able to get to the beach and travel more, but they're giving some strategic kind of wisdom along the way, but they actually have more operators that are running the business, right? And so back to your point of, you have to know what you want as the founder or as an executive leader. Like, what are you trying to ease out into? What is the end goal? And that's often, again, when I come into a company, that's what I help the owner do. It's having the conversations that no one has ever had. And that's why I don't position myself as strictly a fractional CMO, because I honestly like to coach founders as an executive coach. That's yet another thing that I sometimes offer. Even if I'm just coming in as a fractional, I tend to do a level of that too, because we have to know what the end goal is. We have to know what we're trying to achieve. And if you're trying to sell the company, you better be getting your finances in order, and you better have a good method and a good system, because no one's going to want to buy a business that isn't highly structured and highly reliable when it comes to, this money comes in, this money comes out. You got to have all that going really well to have a sellable business, if that's your goal. Too often people just go with the flow. They kind of just assume their team members are going to take over for them later on without having the conversation with their team members. In the other scenario of easing out, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I hired or I have this partner in the company now, and they're going to take over, and then I'm going to be able to do X, Y, and Z later on. Did you talk to that partner about doing that? Because sometimes people want to be a partner in a company. Sometimes people are superstars and they're really great at a certain function, but they don't want to be a people manager, right? You have to know these things about yourself and about your individuals within your company to make sure that you're being smart as you're building it in a way that's going to help you achieve your own goals.
And one thing unique to Thailand is that, not to say this is everyone, but a lot of people, once they get really good at what they do here, they are comfortable. They want to stay there. They aren't necessarily quite like the West, where we're always trying to one up our last role. I've heard from a lot of businesses here that they have great people. They've tried to move up into further levels of management, and the people just haven't enjoyed that experience. And so that's something to keep in mind. So the next thing I'd like you to help us understand is the difference between working with an internal team, a fractional CMO or ops person, and then an agency. So I know that there's a lot of variables there. Internal, as we know, there's high risk as far as making a big investment when you're hiring internally. And I've learned from experience that just because I think a person's going to help me solve a problem, it doesn't always happen. It doesn't always work out the way that I expected during the interview. So I've often then worked with them as contractors, proven the working relationship, and then gone from there. A fractional CMO is coming in and really taking a lot of that strategic focus, but they're typically working with in-house or a bit of the agency and helping manage that. But then you have a lot of companies just going straight to an agency and wanting to outsource aspects of their marketing. And then a lot of people having bad experiences there. I think there's good reasons for that. An agency, they have packages, they need to sell 40 of those to stay profitable. Now you're just one of 40. I think agencies are great, and every agency is a little different. What are your thoughts on those kind of three, how to balance them in good ways, some of the pros and cons?
Yeah. Let me first, I realized that I didn't touch on something and I'm going to answer your questions. When we were talking about the minimum viable marketing team, I touched on very briefly the idea of you have that sole individual and then you bring in a leader, whether that's a full-time or a fractional. What I consider the minimum viable marketing team is usually a team of 3. Remember, one of those could be that part-time leader, it could be a full-time leader, right? We talked about essentially the coordinator. I usually call that the marketing coordinator. And then the other one that I would usually grow into, this doesn't have to be day one, but it would be a content manager. And the reason I say that is because content is so important nowadays, especially with AI. You could say in a way, oh, content is becoming less valuable, but I'd argue good content is becoming more valuable because it's the thing that cuts through the noise, right? And so I consider the content manager, they might be writing blog posts, they might be writing scripts for videos, they might be creating content plans for things. And this plays a little bit into your question about how does this compare to working with an agency, is that I'd argue that it's really important to have a function from within. You have someone who's the accountable leader. You have someone who is dealing with all the coordination because there's a ton of coordination, whether it's social media posts, scheduling, and all this other stuff. I'm organizing people to come into the office to record the podcast. There's a ton of coordination stuff. The content manager is more of the creative and looking what's out there and saying, this is the angle we want to come out on this video, or this is the sort of thing that we want to do. In some cases, they could outsource some of that to a good agency that does video, but the content manager might be the talent on video, that in-house talent. I still think that that's quite a bit different than that highly organized marketing coordinator who is ideally looking at the data, looking at not just coordinating stuff, but also making sure all the reports are created. So you're determining the ROI. They're just getting stuff done.
Scheduling, creating campaigns, all the little nitty gritties is like, oh, we're having an event. Well, someone needs to handle the registrations and the printing out the little name cards. You don't want the video guy to be trying to do that as well.
Exactly. That's where I look at this as left brain versus right brain. Ideally, a leader is a little bit left and right brain, right? They have to look at the details, but they have to look big level and they have to be creative, but they also have to be, looking at ROI. You have your marketing coordinator and your content manager. And remember, they're kind of opposite in terms of how they operate. One is more analytical, one is a little more creative. So that's what I consider to be a small team. And I think in Thailand specifically, these don't have to be hugely expensive roles. They can be roles where one of these individuals might be able to build their skill set, to your point about trying to leverage up your team and take over the leadership role. Right? As a fractional, I love when companies are able to take over my role. Maybe I move into an advisory role because the content manager decided they've learned a bunch and can begin to lead the team. People can grow into the position. The goal to hire me is not to work with me forever. It's to ease that fractional or that leader off and have other people maybe grow into that position. Now, to your question about the agencies to work with. Now, I think it's very important to leverage agencies because there's a benefit of doing things in-house, but you're never ready to do that day one. And so there's a way of saying, let's just say an example of TikTok. I'm just going to use a simple example. Let's say your strategy determined that TikTok is the best platform for your business and your target audience. If that's the case, then the question is, who's your TikTok expert? Chances are you don't have one. The way to leverage an agency is to get the best TikTok agency within a reasonable fee, but not the cheapest one. Work with them because they're going to bring that expertise and help us understand and help us learn more quickly than if we were to do it ourselves. And so that's one example. I think the better example is with things like video, because I think there's a benefit of having a studio in an office, having a place to record things. But guess what? Even if you have a studio and someone can run a camera, you're probably not going to know how to edit videos perfectly. You're probably not going to know how to storyboard things. This is where I think it's really important to leverage an agency that's really good with video. That's the way that I do it. You have a little bit of an internal function, but then for subject matter expertise that you don't have, you work with an agency that has that subject matter expertise. And ideally, you're not working with an agency that does absolutely everything, because they tend to not be super great. I mean, of course, an agency, and I'm sure, Jake, your agency has probably grown out a bit where it's kind of like, okay, we do this, we do this, we do this. But you're certainly not one of these agencies that I see that do 50 different things badly. You do a few things really well. And I think that that's the type of agency that you want to work with. The other thing to share about the dynamic is how you have the internal function and you have the agency. But here's the most important thing in my mind: accountability. Accountability and who is leading it. And in my opinion, you should never have an agency lead it. They can be responsible for what they're doing. I'm not saying don't hold an agency accountable for their deliverables, but if you're thinking you can hire an agency and that they're going to be accountable for the results of your marketing overall, I just think you're setting yourself up for failure, because you mentioned the ratios of clients that an agency work with. Let's say it's 10-1, right? An account manager is working with 10 clients. Let's say it's 20-1. Some of them are 40-1, 50-1, right? The idea of saying, I'm going to hire this person that's going to be giving me a 40th of their time and they're going to be accountable for the results in my organization is just crazy. My thing is that everyone has their accountability. I think the accountability of the results of the growth of your company, the profitability of your company, the margin on your services, things like this, that lives from within. Making sure that within you're going to deal with, are we going to be able to get people out to our location to shoot this video? Are we going to have, that has to live from within. Okay. But then for some of the execution and some of the assistance with strategy, like I don't like to go into an agency and saying, this is the way you guys are going to do it. Because remember, I'm hiring them to be the experts in that area, the parts that I don't know. Of course, I'm trying to retain some of the information they're sharing with me, but realistically, I'm still trying to, hire someone that knows more than me. And so I want them to be accountable for the results of what they're advising and what they're doing and the deliverables they're working on. But if I was to show that little pin of who's the accountable person, it's always within the company. Because guess what? I'm the one who hired so if I'm within the company, I'm accountable for the results of the agency because I'm the one who picked the agency, right?
And you're keeping tabs on them. Two quick examples that perfectly illustrate what you're talking about. A commercial roofing company from Canada hires us remotely to coach them on their video strategy. And it's been working out fairly good.
Yes.
They were very busy in the summer, so it took a little bit to get going, but we could coach them on the minimum viable studio that they needed to put in place. Yeah. We're sending them the exact camera. Here's how to, and they're actually doing it. So they feel like they are very much in control and that it's them doing it. But we're coaching them and we're like, oh, that doesn't look good. Do this and do that. And they're like, wow, that really worked. Thank you. Don't try to do the entire video to the teleprompter. Just do the key bits and then read the rest and we'll throw B-roll over it.
Yes, yes.
So they're getting results much faster, even with us being remote, in something that traditionally you would have had to been in person to do.
Yes, and it's hard to get ChatGPT to give you the answer of what's the right camera gear or whatever. For a roofing company doing X, Y, and Z, it's just going to regurgitate something. But the fact, Jake, that you've worked on site, these sort of things to do. And to be honest, it takes a lot of effort. There was actually another fractional that I work with doing some video work for a company in Thailand. He was just telling me how they did a lot of the talking head videos, but now they're getting into the on the ground videos to keep things more interesting. And it's like, okay, if we do this scene here, we have to record this scene in this order, similar to a movie. You don't shoot a movie in order of the chronological thing of the movie. You do it based off the location that you're in and stuff like this. So you have to think through all these things and say, okay, we can get this shot here. We can get that shot here. We need to turn left, or we have to have the talent turn right as it's transitioning to this other thing. I mean, if you just have a junior marketing coordinator or a content manager doing that, trying to grow into the role, I just think you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Whereas if you say someone like you, Jake, and your team is able to coach them, you're going to speed up the process so much. Because
we can save them so much. As my one friend says, faffing about. We can save them all this meandering and figuring things out, and then 2 years later finally going, oh, this is what we should have been doing all along, and the other stuff was a waste of time.
Yes.
To illustrate your point, we have another client we work for successfully for several years, but we are one of 4 agencies. We are doing something specific for them. There's no real accountable person except the founder of the company. Very busy to be keeping tabs on all the marketing. So I bring it up to him every 6 months or so and just say, hey, I know things are good and you guys, these 4 agencies actually work together really good and share information. We are all trying to get you good results and it seems to be working. However, this is kind of the exception to the rule. Sometimes we're feeling like there isn't that strategic vision. We're just kind of executing his to-do list. Yeah. And we feel like that isn't a long-term strategy necessarily.
I have clients in the US and Australia, and I like to work with those type of companies, but I would just want to give some advice effectively running a company in Thailand, because you and I, Jake, have been here for a few years and we've probably seen people struggle some of them honestly throw up their hands and say, it doesn't work. People aren't accountable and all this other stuff. It's true. It's a different culture. I just recently had a conversation on my podcast with Brendan Cunningham. He brought up a good point. Everyone's an individual in Thailand. And so there's generalizations. There are cultural generalizations. People tend to do this. People tend to do that. I'm kind of focusing on them, to be honest. But it is important, to Brendan's point, that it's also important to think of people as individuals.
I agree with that 100%. I have a Thai team member who breaks every possible stereotype you would have of the Thai work culture.
Yes.
And she's worked for me almost 4 years now. So even before I started my company.
Yes.
I always have to remind people that she's Thai.
Yeah, exactly. There's always exceptions to the rule. But a common things we see in Thailand is that if you're an American, a Brit, or Australian, you're going to have a Western mentality, and you might not realize how much you're kind of scaring off some of the Thais where they're not speaking up. And I think it's really important that you understand that. You mentioned the term safe space a little bit. You need people to be able to share stuff. If people are less likely to speak up, you can really go down bad tracks because they're not vocalizing things. To me, this is where I tend to have a lot of one-on-ones with individuals, because if I, as a Westerner coming in and saying, I need this, I need that, what do you think? You're going to get a lot of yeses on average. And so that might mean you go down a bad track.
Well, a yes doesn't necessarily mean that everything was understood. The employee often can feel like a yes is needed at this point,
Yes.
And they're going to have to go figure it out because they feel like you expected them to be able to say yes in that situation.
So better say yes, because it's uncomfortable to say no, right?
What are you calling into question if you didn't get what the boss was saying?
So it's the understanding, maybe not agreeing, but not wanting to vocalize. I mean, actually, let me just share a quick example. When I was, again, working in an agency here years back, I was kind of this go-getter that worked up to the executive team. I started getting in these meetings, and then I'd kind of like be excited in the meeting, and I'd say, hey, we could do this, and hey, we could do that. I later found out from the individuals that they were all scared of me in that meeting, right? And I'm kind of like the guy that had just joined 6 months ago and was kind of blazing a trail, and they were all like, oh my gosh, I'm in a meeting with Scott, right? And I had scared them all off. Now, over time, I was able to acclimate more to Thailand. And that's the main thing that I want people to understand. Once you acclimatize to Thailand, you can win here, right? And that's the main message I want to get across, is that it's challenging, yes. There's cultural differences, yes. There's different levels of talent, different levels of other things, right? There's a lot of great talent here that you wouldn't get other places. But the point is, you can make it work, and you can win here in Thailand. You cannot go in saying, I'm going to supplant myself and land in Thailand, and then all of a sudden win the same way that I would win back home. It's a different way to win. Can you win? Yes. Can you have accountable team managers and whatnot? Yes. Can you have people show up on time to meetings? Yes. Can you have people be honest with you? Yes. All these things are true, but you have to change the way you present things. You have to change the way you organize things. And this is what I honestly love to do. I love to come to a company, even if it's just on a consulting engagement, and just talk to everyone in the organization. One thing I've been amazed with is that there's a level of people just being honest about what happens, sometimes within milliseconds. It's funny how often I'm able to extract information that the owner hasn't extracted in years, and I'm getting the honest truth from 5 different people in the organization, where it's like all these aha moments going on within moments of coming in. And it's a matter of how you approach it. Sometimes it's the matter of, because you're not the big boss and you're someone else, people are more honest,
more comfortable.
Correct. I just love doing that because it helps people win here. If it's frustrating, I totally understand. If you're running a business and you're frustrated, I get it. But you can absolutely do better. You sometimes need a third-party perspective or someone else to help you along the way. And that's what I love to do.
Recently, one of my local team members made a sarcastic joke at me. I'm a very sarcastic person. I've had conversations with the team, and in a humorous way. I'm not sarcastic in a negative way. I'm like sarcastic humorously, and I think that's a funny way of humor. And so they get it now, and they've started to do that back to me because I've shown them that it's safe to do. I was shocked. I didn't get it that she was being sarcastic.
So you didn't
Oh no, this is how it feels. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the video podcast today and sharing so much of your experience and perspectives on how companies can do a lot more. But I think the key thing that people are going to get out is the perspectives on how to arrange some of these resources. All these resources are out there. There's agencies like mine and many others who promise you the world. I think business owners listening to you can get a really, really good idea of what makes sense what roads to go down and how to organize those. So thank you so much.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jake. And I love seeing what you guys are doing. I mean, again, I think that for individuals looking to get into this and want to work with a trustworthy agency, what you're doing online shows that you know what you're talking about. It's fantastic. Looking forward to working with you.